Welcome back to Battleground Politics. I'm Lauren Mayk. Pennsylvania plays a big role in national politics, but it's got its own internal politics and family dynamics as well. And recently, there have been some changes here. Pennsylvania has a new governor, Democrat Josh Shapiro, and there's been some power shifting in Harrisburg. Well, we're going to talk about that, what's ahead for the U.S. Senate race, and where Pennsylvania's primary date could land.
We are talking politics in Pennsylvania today with someone who knows a lot about it. My guest today is Marc Levy. He is a politics and government reporter for the Associated Press. He joins me now. Hey, Marc.
Hi, how are you?
I am good. And we're going to let the audience in on a little bit of a secret. Marc and I have known each other for more than 20 years, which that's kind of crazy to say out loud.
It's incredible. Yeah.
We started together on the very same day as reporters at the Philadelphia Inquirer back in the day. And I actually remember that day. I have like little flashes of memory from that day. We were in the building that is now the police headquarters in Philadelphia, because that used to be the old Philadelphia Inquirer building.
That's right. Back when that was sort of an icon in the city.
Yeah. I remember you walk in and have those vaulted ceilings and everything.
It was a beautiful building.
And we were little cub reporters. And then we worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer together, covering South Jersey, covering local government, a lot of school board meetings. I was covering Burlington County. What county were you covering?
I was covering townships in Burlington County.
You were in Burlington as well? Okay.
Mount Holly, Pemberton Township, McGuire Air Force Base, maybe a little bit of coverage in Camden.
Okay. All right. Do you still, now covering things statewide, are there things from back then that you still come across? I mean, you're in Pennsylvania now, but do you still come across any of the same people that you talked to back in the day?
No.
It's a totally different world.
Two completely different worlds, yeah.
Totally different world. Yeah, I was covering Burlington County, Willingboro. Spent a lot of time at school board meetings in Willingboro, but it was really great. It was really great experience, getting to know those towns and communities, and getting to know you. And now Marc and I run into each other at political events that we are covering for our respective organizations, and end up having some great conversations about politics and what's going on in various races and what politicians answered our questions or didn't answer our questions. So I thought that we would bring one of those conversations here today. So let's talk about Harrisburg and where things are there, because you covered things, Marc, under Governor Tom Wolf, and now we've got Governor Josh Shapiro, both Democrats, but the legislature has changed a bit as well. Governor Wolf was working with a completely Republican-controlled legislature. Josh Shapiro has a divided government there. How do things feel different now under Governor Shapiro with this sort of split legislature than they did under Governor Wolf?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's one big difference from the final years of Tom Wolf's administration and the first 6, 7, 8 months of Josh Shapiro's administration. But yeah, from the get-go, having a Democratic-controlled House as opposed to Republican-controlled House means that the friction point happens a lot earlier when we're talking about partisan legislation. It now gets stuck between the House and the Senate. Whereas under Tom Wolf, who was governor for 8 years, he's a Democrat. He was governor while there were at times historically large majorities of Republicans in the House and the Senate. All 8 years were under Republican control. So the friction point was most often between him and those two chambers. And he actually set a 40-year record for vetoes. In no small part because Republicans in both chambers were able to get together and send bills that they liked to his desk, even though they knew that he opposed them and would veto them, and he did. The friction point now happens a lot earlier. Like I said, bills that leave the Republican-controlled Senate are going to go nowhere in the Democrat-controlled House unless there's an earlier agreement between those two chambers. And to a great extent, it shields Josh Shapiro from a lot of that that friction, that partisan fist fighting in the Capitol.
Although we did see things get a little messy with the budget, which was interesting because there were a lot of expectations that when Shapiro came in, he had worked in the legislature before, that he would be able to work across the aisle, and that things would be able to get done in a different way than they had before, and that ended up being a little messy.
That's right. He had made a number of representations on the campaign trail that we're going to return to lawmaking. We're going to return to the business of the State House, a reference to the years under Tom Wolf when there was so much disagreement that Republicans in the legislature, tired of seeing their bills vetoed, went the route of constitutional amendments to try to take their priorities straight to voters in referenda. That's something that Tom Wolf as a governor can't block. Any governor can't block. And Wolf, for his part, would try to establish policy through regulation, things that the legislature can't block unless they have a supermajority. So in the budget, the way Democrats saw it, that Josh Shapiro sided with Republicans in the Senate on a couple key priorities. Number one among them, starting a $100 million voucher program to send students, public school students, to private schools. And he took that in the representation of Republicans. He told them that he could sell that to the Democratic-controlled House with some sweeteners that Democrats in the House wanted. Well, that turned out not to be true. Democrats in the House blocked it. And so we have a 2-month budget stalemate that continues to this day. Large portions of the budget are done. There are some strands hanging that mean that certain programs aren't distributing money. State universities aren't getting the hundreds of millions of dollars that they typically expect. That's at Temple, Pitt, and at Penn State. Hospitals are not guaranteed to get about $1 billion in federal money. Things like that are hanging around.
Yeah. Well, we know that Governor Shapiro is also going to be making a stop outside of Pennsylvania very soon, and that's in New Hampshire, which is, I wanted to talk about this also a little bit because this is certainly raising some eyebrows because he's been talked about as a future presidential candidate, not in this cycle, in the future, but we all know that you go to New Hampshire, you go to Iowa, and I guess you go to South Carolina probably now as well, since that's going to be one of the early states as well. But that certainly is raising some eyebrows. He's given a speech there for the New Hampshire Democratic Party. How is that being received? Is that kind of just like, yeah, we sort of expected this kind of thing to happen, or is that what kind of buzz is that getting?
Well, look, party insiders are very excited about Josh Shapiro. He's one of a handful of people that they like to talk about as a rising star in the party, one of several young governors. Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan is another one of these people who get talked about in regularity as a potential candidate for president in what year would it be? 2028, since we're going to elect another president next year. Joe Biden is the likely nominee for the Democrats. Josh Shapiro has made clear that he supports Joe Biden, but the party will need somebody else in 2028. And New Hampshire is one of the early voting states, as you mentioned. And of course, the Democratic Party in New Hampshire has an interest in getting a rising star to come speak at their annual convention and their dinner to draw people, maybe to raise money for the party there. And of course, Josh Shapiro is a lot closer than Gretchen Whitmer or perhaps some of the other rising stars that are being talked about in the party. Now, when 2028 does roll around, of course, there's going to be roughly 50 U.S. senators from the Democratic Party, many of whom will see themselves as presidential material, and maybe a billionaire or two out there.
I mean, it's true. We do hear, a lot of people think about it. I remember, there was a moment in time when Bob Casey was was thinking about it as well. Remember in the previous cycle, and I remember seeing him. I don't think it was New Hampshire. I think it was Iowa. He was out there campaigning in Iowa for Joe Biden, and but you know you're right. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of folks talked about. I'll be curious to find out who he maybe meets with out there. You know, will he take any other meetings while he's out there? Will he just go to the dinner, just go to the that event that he's scheduled to speak at, or will there be anyone else who asks to meet with him or who he asks to meet with? I'll be curious sort of what that trip looks like.
Yeah, and going to for people who may not have encountered this concept before, going to a dinner like that or to perform as a keynote speaker somewhere breeds a lot of goodwill. So, for instance, Joe Biden, before he was president, campaigned heavily across Pennsylvania for years. He's campaigned for many of the top Democrats who are in office. He campaigned for Bob Casey. He campaigned for Tom Wolf. He campaigned for Connor Lamb. And that breeds goodwill. And so then in turn, when Joe Biden ran for president, there was a lot of built up goodwill and people who were willing to help him here and endorse him and side with him in any sort of primary. And so this is sort of the coin of the realm in politics, that when you do favors for a party, whether even if it's a county party, you give them $500, or you appear at their dinner to help them raise money at their annual dinner, or you do it for a state party, or you stump for a candidate who's in a tough re-election race. These are the things that breed goodwill for your future political prospects.
Yeah. Well, we will see. Well, while we're talking about early voting states, Pennsylvania, it appears, wants to be a little earlier. Pennsylvania has traditionally been later on the primary calendar, which some people don't like, because by the time Pennsylvania's primary date rolls around, a lot of the decisions are made a lot of times. This year, the primary date in Pennsylvania is scheduled to be April 23rd. And there are multiple proposals to move that back. I think 3 different dates are floating out there, the earliest one being March 19th. And that would certainly move things up. Now, even though there are these different proposals of different dates, do you feel like there is momentum to do this one way or another?
Yeah, so every lawmaker I've talked to a person says that they will move the date, primarily because April 23rd falls on the first day of Passover, which is a Jewish holiday when many observant Jews will observe the same traditions that they observe on the Sabbath, which is they don't drive, they don't work, they don't use electricity, and so voting would be out of the question. Now, they can vote early by mail, but maybe there are others who won't be able to work the polls or perform some other function on election day. So, to a person, lawmakers are,
or candidates themselves, even candidates themselves who might not be able to be out, campaigning and talking to people.
That's a great point. And Pennsylvania law sets the presidential primary on the 4th Tuesday of April, and Passover, because it follows a different calendar, it's a different day every year. So these things float on the calendar, and this in 2024 they'll line up. And so Republicans are motivated to try to make the date as early as possible. March 19th is the earliest day that they're talking about. That would be 2 weeks after Super Tuesday, which is when a lot of major states, a lot of big delegate states are voting. And so it's possible that a nominee will have been all but chosen by then in terms of having a large delegate lead. The Democratic Party is unlikely to have a serious contest since the president Joe Biden is running again. The Republicans do have a large field right now. Donald Trump has a large lead in the polls.
Very large, yeah.
but there's some hope among Republicans that they'll at least be able to give the voters in the state some say, some influence over who the final nominee is going to be. After that, on March 26th, which is the next Tuesday, no state is voting that day. April 2nd has been in the mix. Several states are voting on that day. There's some talk about March 26th and April 2nd being problematic because of Holy Week, which is the week that falls between Palm Sunday and Easter, and is the most sacred week of the year on the calendar for millions of Christians. And so county election clerks have told lawmakers that it's going to be difficult to hold a primary on the first Tuesday after Easter, which is April 2nd or March 26th. And they've pushed for April 9th and April 16th, which are also Tuesdays in April.
And getting people to work the polls, that's a real thing. I mean, that's a thing that counties, I know Philadelphia has had a challenge with all of the polls that they have to staff, really, making a huge effort to try to get people to sign up. There was during COVID that, became an issue. You have especially a lot of older people work the polls. It's something that they, do time after time, year after year, cycle after cycle. And there were, some who didn't feel comfortable doing it during COVID. And so there was this real push to get younger people to fill those spots. But the idea of whether or not you're going to have enough people to staff the polls that's a real thing.
It is a real thing, and changing the primary means that every county which administers their own election in their county is going to have to make sure they have the personnel for that weekend and the polling places. And so, a lot of churches are host to polling places, which is another reason why Holy Week could be problematic in terms of getting election machines to those churches. But yeah, the later it is, the easier it's going to be for counties, but they're still going to have to, make sure that they have the people and machines in place and the polling places in place as well.
Has there been any weighing in that you've seen by the national parties in this? And I asked about this. I remember having a conversation with Sharif Street a while back, months ago, who is Sharif Street, the chair of the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania, who's also a state senator. And he was talking about sort of the balance of not wanting to go too early because of potential penalties. And I remember back in 2012, I was working in Florida, and Florida moved up their primary and got penalized by the Republican Party, penalized them. And it took seats away from them, delegates away from them at the convention, which was very awkward because Tampa was hosting the Republican convention that year. And so they weren't allowed to bring as many people as they wanted to that convention, which was a little awkward because they were the host delegation. Has there been any weighing in by the parties that you've heard yet in terms of like how early can you go?
So I think both parties have sort of a cutoff of March 1st, but really the Republicans have not discussed pushing it earlier than March 19th. Sharif Street told me the other day that the national parties seem interested in April 2nd as a regional primary day. New York looks likely to go that day. Rhode Island, Delaware, and Wisconsin are also going that day. Lawrence Tabus, the Republican state chair in Pennsylvania, said that the RNC has given him no direction or expressed no wishes as to when they would like to have it. And he personally favors March 19th, figuring that it's as early as possible, but also respects the need for candidates and parties to organize after this year's election in time for the upcoming primary. So the state law sets a 13-week primary season, 3 weeks of gathering petitions, 10 weeks of being candidates before the election. So the earlier the primary is, the farther it pushes into the year before. So if the primary election's on April 23rd, candidates would start gathering petitions probably, or around late January, early February. If it's March 19th, that pushes it into the holiday season in 2023. So there's some sensitivity around that. A lot of lawmakers don't want to be gathering petitions while they're trying to observe the holidays with their family.
All right. Well, it sounds like they've still got some work to do, but things are pushing in the direction of some sort of change. So we'll see how that plays out. Either way, regardless of what that date is, we know that Pennsylvania is going to be a battleground state in 2024 in a couple of ways. First of all, in the presidential race, but also in a Senate race, which we are starting to see get underway. Bob Casey we know he is running again. And, you and I came across each other on the campaign trail in 2022 as John Fetterman was running for Senate, now Senator Fetterman. And, I was thinking about Bob Casey and John Fetterman, and that, the Democrats are going to go from a campaign with John Fetterman to a campaign with Bob Casey. And these guys are very different, and yet at the same time, there are big similarities in that they're both big fundraisers in different ways. They also are able to play in areas that are maybe not as traditionally Democratic areas for different reasons. Because of their backgrounds, because of where in Pennsylvania they are from. Bob Casey's from Scranton. John Fetterman is from Braddock. But it's interesting when you think about these two guys, because they on their face look very different, and yet there are some similarities there that could allow them to kind of play in the same places.
Yes, they both emphasize to a great degree the need to campaign everywhere in Pennsylvania, all 67 counties. It was actually John Fetterman's campaign slogan, if I recall, every county, every vote. But even before he ran for Senate, Bob Casey had been talking about that to a great extent, going back to his last race in 2018. The need for Democrats to campaign, at least be seen and show up and be heard, even in counties that are deep red, that are heavily Republican, to go there and to meet with the Democrats who are there and to show them that you care. But yeah, they're two very different personalities, but it's quite possible that we'll see John Fetterman on the campaign trail for Bob Casey. John Fetterman emerged as something of a rock star, kind of having his own brand and cult following in the Democratic Party. And he was a powerhouse fundraiser, and Bob Casey and he seemed to get along quite well by all accounts.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what the other side brings. We're certainly waiting to see how things will shake out on the Republican side. The expectation has been that Dave McCormick would get in the race, and potentially one of the things that could do was make it a very expensive race again, as the primary race last time around was, and the general election as well. But if he doesn't run, then Republicans will have to field someone else. They right now seem to be waiting on McCormick.
Yeah, there's no obvious person who's going to step into the breach and run if David McCormick doesn't run. David McCormick has a long resume. He's got deep connections across the world of politics, business, government. He is wealthy after spending about a dozen years as a top executive at one of the world's largest hedge funds. But, Pennsylvania's U.S. Senate race will have a lot of eyes on it. Every Senate seat is of great value because the Senate is very closely divided. So on a national map, Democrats are going to have to defend seats in red states like Montana and West Virginia and Ohio. And so those, of course, are of great importance to both parties. Pennsylvania is a swing state, and the Senate races here are always a lot of attention, although not necessarily competitive. Bob Casey has won his 3 Senate elections handily. And so we'll see if he's going to get his first, really, really competitive race.
Yeah, and I'm curious what this will look like statewide, and whether we have seen, whether we are seeing a shift in power in Pennsylvania in terms of the regions where these candidates find votes. Um, you know, traditionally, the thought for Democrats was that you needed to, grab as many votes in Philadelphia as you could, because you needed that to balance out what was going to happen and the votes that were going to come out in other parts of the state for Republicans. And certainly that is still the case. But what we've seen in recent cycles is that it's really been the suburban counties around Philadelphia that have turned this deeper blue. And with turnout not being gangbusters in Philadelphia, those votes have been really significant for Joe Biden, for John Fetterman. They've been really important. And I'm curious of whether that is going to continue, and where those focus areas are going to be, and if we'll see more visits from Democrats to the suburban counties than to Philadelphia. What are you seeing statewide?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the suburbs were tremendously powerful for Democrats. The Trump era seemed to accelerate trends that were already underway, multi-decade trends that were underway, in which Democrats were taking more votes in suburbs, and some of their traditional areas outside of the major metropolitan centers were starting to slide away. So the Johnstown area, the Wilkes-Barre area, the Erie area were starting to turn more Republican. And the city populations around Pennsylvania are not really growing quickly, if at all. And so the suburbs under Trump, it's really hard to overstate what happened. They just produced tremendous margins for Democrats in 2016, in 2018, 2020. And in 2022. And, we saw John Fetterman do campaigning in the suburbs. He kicked off his campaign, he had a major event in Montgomery County, for instance, when he unveiled a shirt that said John Fetterwoman, his campaign to try to. It was
a very abortion and women's rights themed event.
And he went to the suburbs to kick that off. And so, yeah, I haven't seen any sign that these trends are stopping. There's different permutations. Every election is different, but it hasn't seemed to change in the last 2 years.
Yeah, and a big question has been whether Republicans will be able to get back, any of those voters, and that may depend in part on the candidates and which candidates they choose. And it's one of the questions that I've asked when I've gone to talk to suburban voters around Philadelphia, Montgomery County, Chester County, Delaware County, about who they're interested in, who might pique their attention. Whether that's a Ron DeSantis or in the presidential race, or whether it's a Nikki Haley in the presidential race. And, there's a question of whether or not some of those voters can be won back.
Exactly. Some Republicans feel that a more moderate candidate, a female candidate, will be more palatable to the Republicans in the suburbs who they've lost under Trump. I mean, there are Republicans in the suburbs around Philadelphia and Pittsburgh who may still vote down ballot for Republicans in local offices, but they will not vote for Trump or Trump-aligned candidates at the top of the ticket for federal office. That's how turned off they were by Trump, and the margins show it. What Trump pulled off in 2016 was extraordinary, that he lost the suburbs by extraordinary margins, but won many other areas of the state by margins that we just never seen before. We've never seen these voters come out in some of the farther flung counties, the less populated counties, the more Republican counties came out so strong for him. but he has not, and Republicans have not been able to, in large part, repeat that success.
All right. Well, Marc, it's been great talking to you today, and we've got a long campaign ahead of us. So hope to talk to you again.
Yeah, look, Pennsylvania is going to be one of the premier battleground states for a president next year. So there's going to be a lot of people coming, a lot of TV ads. So everyone should, prepare themselves.
Get ready. Here it comes. All right. Thanks, Marc. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
You can find more Battleground Politics on our website. Just go to NBCPhiladelphia.com/Battleground Politics. And you can subscribe for more episodes to come on our NBC10 YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts.